Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm so excited to get into some of the new Lawn Fawn products that I've had that I just haven't had time to use. Now today I'm creating a beach scene card and I'm pulling in stamps from the new Lawn Fawn on the beach stamp set. I'm also going to bring in one of the little mermaids, that's an older set, and then I'm going to use several dies to create my scene. Now I've stamped all of my images onto Nina Solar White, the 80-pound cardstock, using Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and then I use my Copic markers to color in the images. And then I used my scan and cut to cut them out. A lot of the elements for this card are going to be ink blended, and here I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock. And then I'm starting in with Salty Ocean for the sky background, and then I will blend that out with a little bit of tumbled glass. I just go back and forth adding color and each time overlapping just a little bit to blend out any harsh lines. Then I will spray some water from my water distress sprayer and pick that up with a dry paper towel. I've cut another piece of Bristol smooth cardstock with the simple stitched Hillside borders die, and then I'm going to create my little beach. For that I'm using Vintage Photo for the bottom portion of that panel, and then I will ink blend Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide over that to create a little bit of dimension. And then again, I'll just go back and forth blending out any harsh lines and adding more depth and dimension by combining the colors. Next, I'm going to start working on the waves. Again, I have a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock and I'm ink blending tumbled glass on top of that panel. And then I add a little bit of Salty Ocean before I die cut those out. Now originally when I created the waves, I had a different background panel. The colors were different than the waves. When I put them together, the color combinations, it didn't work well together. It just kind of really, they were too different. And so I had created a second background using the same inks, and so once I had everything cut and put against each other, it just blended in a little too well at that point. And then I can go ahead and ink up the cardstock for my little sun. For that, I'm using mustard seed and a little bit of wild honey. Okay, so here's all my components kind of die cut, and this is already the second panel for the background that I used a stitched rectangle die by Lawn Fawn. And then I've cut out the rest of the elements and I can kind of start arranging them to see where I'm going to place what. I inadvertently cut one of the waves in the wrong direction, so I wasn't getting that stitch detail that's part of that die, so I had to redo that. So once I had those two waves up against the background, again, they all kind of blended in. There was no distinct separation of those elements. So I thought the way to fix it would be to bring in some pigment ink, and this is Unicorn Pigment Ink by Hero Arts, and then I'm just pouncing that ink on top of those panels just to create a little bit of texture and lighten them up for the most part. I take a little bit with my ink blending tool and dab it off onto the matte, and then I just pounce and create some texture. And then I can just let those dry off to the side. And you'll see here when I place those, the waves that I've die cut earlier, they're just a little too similar. So one way I thought to fix it would be to add a piece of white cardstock that I've die cut with those waves. And I do choose that option, and I think it looks great. However, I do decide that I'm going to fix the background, and all I'm doing is I'm taking my ink blending tool and I'm adding Blueprint Sketch right on top of that. It takes a little bit of effort because I've got so much ink on there and it's already dry, and so you see a little bit of splotchiness, but that's okay. I go ahead and fix that by using the blender brush tool, and I just pile that ink right on top. I add a little bit more of the water, and then I pick that up with a paper towel, and I think that background looks a little bit better with those waves, especially adding just the white wave background. I just kind of try to arrange it and see how it's gonna all lay out, and then I can start adhering the components together. I've got the little beach, and I'm adhering that to the top panel of the waves, and that's the ink blended one. And then I try to arrange how I think the other piece is going to look good. Before I start adhering everything to my panel, I needed to stamp out my sentiment, and I'm using the creative corners to line up the sentiment. Because the sentiment was all different sizes, I wanted to be sure that I had it on there as straight as possible, so that's why I'm using the creative corners to help me. Once I have those in place, I will use a little bit of anti-static powder just to remove any of the static that is left from touching the panel and whatnot. And then I'll bring in my VersaFine Onyx Black ink and stamp that sentiment. And once I have that stamped, I'm gonna add a little bit of clear embossing powder over that and melt it with my heat tool. Now I'm ready to start assembling my components to the card. First, I'm going to adhere the background panel, the sky panel, to an A2 size card base. And I often make my own card bases, and so oftentimes I don't get it just right, and I have a little bit hanging over, and so I have to trim that off, which is no big deal. Next, I'm taking the beach that I've got adhered to one of the wave panels, and I'm going to add a little bit of adhesive to the back of it. And then, because the other panel is a little bit shorter, I kind of had to play around with the positioning before I adhered them together. And then I'll go ahead and add a little more adhesive to the back. Before I put down that panel to the background, there's a little bit of a gap between the top layer and the bottom layer, and so oftentimes I have these little strips of heavy cardstock left over from Whatnots, and then I'll just trim those up and use those as a leveling piece, I guess. It just helps me to level out the entire panel. And then I add a little more adhesive and I place that on top of the sky background. So I have my little mermaid that I'm trying to tuck in between the waves, and I just didn't think of it to do it before I adhered it all together. And this is actually a terrible placement for her, and you'll see that towards the end and how I attempt to fix it. But for now, she just kind of gets tucked in between those two waves so that she looks like as if she's popping out. And once I get her all in there, I can put an acrylic block on top to secure that. Next, I go ahead and adhere my little sun, and I've got that in the top right hand corner. And then I can start building out my little scene. I've got all of the images that I've Copic colored earlier, and I'll have a link to my blog down below with a list of all of the markers that I used. And I can start now building up my scene. I've got the umbrella adhered. I've got the little towel. I'm going to add that in place. And I'm just adhering everything with liquid adhesive. I'm not popping anything up because there's just a lot going on in this little scene. Once I have that down, I can go ahead and add my little bear. And pop him into place. And then I'm going to add the little ball. And kind of tuck that off to the side. And finally I can add my sunscreen lotion. And give him his little glasses. And those are some really tiny images that I had to add glue to and adhere. So once I had that complete, the left hand side looked really empty because all of my elements were now onto the right side of the panel. So I thought the way to fix it would be to add another element. And so I brought this die. This is an older die, and it is called Palm Trees. And so I'm just ink blending a couple of pieces of cardstock with walnut stain for the base and a little bit of Mowed Lawn and Lucky Clover for the palm. And then I try to place both of those onto my little card. And I think the two of them together would have been great, except for the fact that now my mermaid looks like she is sitting in the tree instead of floating in the ocean. So the way I thought to fix that was to make one of those larger palm trees a little bit shorter. So I snipped a little bit off the top, and still it looks like she's just sitting in that palm tree, which is ridiculous. So then I thought the only thing left to do was to trim off the bottom, a little bit of the bottom of that palm tree. So I have a little stubby palm tree into the left corner of that scene. But it did fill up the scene, and I think it looked just a little bit better. Anyway, I'm adding a little bit of shading with my Copic marker to the palm tree just to give it a little bit of dimension. And then I'm taking a couple of different shades of browns and just adding some dots for texture on my sand. And then I'm bringing in a green marker and I'm adding some lines, some veins, I guess they are, over my palms. Now off screen I did add some white dots using a white gel pen onto that sand just to create some contrast. And then I'm adding this little coconut drink to the scene because I felt like that area needed just a little something. And so that was the only image left that I had. And then I can just adhere that into place and finish off the card. For a final touch, I'm adding some glossy accents to the bear's glasses, and then I bring in a little bit of shimmer to the mermaid's tail and bathing suit. And that will complete my little beach scene card. Let me know what you think by leaving a comment down below and hitting the like button if you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.